Into the Breach dares to ask, can you care more about these little gray apartment buildings than your kick-ass kaiju-fighting mechs? There are very few tactics games that make you care about something other than your squad of units. Rather, in recent years, tactics games have become infused with relationship management sim systems because of the immense popularity of Fire Emblem. Part of the joy now of tactics games is the real or imagined evolving relationships between your units. And so tactics games make you care a lot about your units. It's about them. Their evolution from simpletons to juggernauts, from suffering under the scrutiny of an imp to then taking on divine beings. Tactics games are so rewarding because of this story within a story structure. Sure, you have to fight aliens or the big bad evil guy or whatever, but it's also about building this rags to riches plotline of your units and characters. But Into the Breach turns the norms of tactics games on its head. It quashes intra-party mingling and powerful progression. Instead, the game is asking you, telling you, to shift your attention from your Vex-smashing mechs to protecting civilians and power centers. And I want to talk about why the game is telling you this, and then why it's so freaking cool. Tactics games, and a lot of strategy games in general, are about managing threat. This is one part of Matthew Davis's Game Developers Conference post-mortem on Into the Breach. And if you like Into the Breach, I strongly encourage you to go watch it. I've just picked out some of my favorite bits here.
In generality, if you look at a tactics game, a lot of it deals with managing threat. You have these attack zones that the enemy has and that the player units have, and it's about staying out of their attack zones and putting them in your attack zones.
What is the best and most effective way to destroy the enemy while taking the littlest harm to my units as possible? This is threat management a lot of the time in tactics games. Fire Emblem with party members permanently dying makes threat management insanely high. You don't want to lose a character because not only are they just gone, their whole story and their relationship with other characters is gone too. Other games like Civilization make threat management more economic. What's the cost of losing units here in this battle in terms of production or gold compared to other objectives? XCOM 2 is somewhere in the middle in all of this, where sometimes meeting the objective is more important than an individual unit, but if you're too reckless mission after mission, you'll never get soldiers strong enough to face new alien threats. But in almost all cases, threat is to your units rather than to some objective. Sometimes you have missions where your characters aren't the number one focus of your enemy, but this isn't the norm. Into the Breach makes this the norm. The Vec, or the insect aliens that are now attacking Earth, are attacking buildings, and this allows subset games to create deterministic gameplay. There's no hit percentages or die 20s here. Rather, the telegraphed attacks force players into these combat, chess, and puzzle-like scenarios, and your units become pieces to eliminate the Vec or put themselves in harm's way in order to protect the human populace. This is really jarring and probably like the big kind of piece of design language in Into the Breach that you have to learn. And it's weird if you've been a long-time tactics fan or you're a newly arrived one. If you're coming from Baldur's Gate 3, you don't want your party members to die. But in Into the Breach, you can and probably should regularly throw your mechs into the line of fire to pursue the objective. And so why is this really awesome? Because the game becomes about making interesting choices at every turn, which isn't something honestly that a lot of strategy and tactics games do. A lot of combat encounters in a lot of games can boil down to kill the enemy before the enemy kills you. It might sound simple or reductive, and it probably is a little bit, but a lot of your favorite isometric role-playing tactics games in general, are basically this. Heck, most of XCOM 2 is this, even though it might be dressed up a little differently. And so a lot of the time, combat doesn't contain that many, if at all, interesting choices because it's all about that threat management or efficiency. How much damage can we deal? How many enemies can we disable, and how can we do all of this with the fewest actions as possible? It's sometimes less about strategy and more about number crunching in a spreadsheet somewhere else. And this too is actually more reflective of choices made outside of combat scenarios than within them. And something about this always has bothered me. As a longtime dungeon master of tabletop role-playing games, sure, players sometimes just want to kill stuff. They want to have a combat encounter that's like checkers, but I have to say a lot of the most memorable combat encounters have been about some other kind of objective than just kill all the goblins. And Into the Breach is riddled with more, because you can't just kill every Vek, because in fact the Vek retreat, and the Vek also don't want to kill all your mechs. They want to kill these little gray buildings. And so Into the Breach constantly puts you in small, tightly designed scenarios where you're always forced to choose and decide. Like chess, you deliberate over moving pieces where, synergizing what abilities against what Vek, and you account for how you can use the design of the map and the environment in your favor. But maybe I'm just conditioned to like all of this objective-based combat because as a kid, I never really liked Team Deathmatch in Halo 2 as much as Capture the Flag or Bomb. Or maybe also because I so immensely enjoyed Rush compared to Conquest and Battlefield Bad Company 2. There were always new strategies and choices and flows to combat when the game mode becomes about achieving something that isn't just wiping out the enemy better than they can wipe you out. So by making Into the Breach all about these tiny little gray boxes, it manages to make a tactics game that often feels more tactical than most of its peers. And it's still my go-to for getting that pure, rich, tactical goodness compared to a lot of other really good games as well. I also think this is one of the reasons why Baldur's Gate 3's combat is really good, because it adds some of these deterministic factors by design. Like we have elemental combos, shoving and throwing, jumping, and other environmental factors, which really aren't quite actually baked into the chassis of 5e, but actually make combat a lot more interesting. And while I don't have anything against the checkerboard of most tactics games, I hope we start to see more of this chess-like design going forward. And for the next game dev to innovate on subset and make us care for something that's not our units, but a little more exciting than some gray blocks with speech bubbles.